very much to Stuart and Niall for having me on tonight. And I'm after learning an awful lot about games-based approach to training from Stuart's first part of the session. So I think Stuart, you nearly summed everything up that I was going to say, but sure, we'll crack on for the next 15 or 16 minutes anyway and see if we can get something out of it. Just by way of introduction, look, the lads have introduced me already. My name is Saoirse Bulfin. I've been coaching, I suppose, for the last 26 or 7 years at this stage. I started when I was fairly young. And tonight I want to talk to you about kind of adult, the games-based approach to adult coaching, if you like, for want of a better word. So if Stuart just puts up the second slide. Just before we start, what I will say to you is I'm only going to talk through maybe the 9 points I have here. And what I always find about these things is, personally, and this is only kind of personally, I find I get more out of these sort of things if it's more of a sort of a two-way thing, and if there's a good bit of interaction. So what I will say is, if you have any questions at any stage, fire them on to Stuart, or I don't know if there's a hands up function like there is on Teams, and stop me and just ask me a question, because as I said, I find that the best way of getting anything out of these kind of things are just to kind of have a two-way, if you like, interaction. It's the one thing I would say about this is, I'll contradict maybe what Stuart said at the very start of his talk, is if you look at my first point there, I've said about not forgetting the basics, and I'm a big believer in the games-based approach to developing sessions and to developing kind of a certain style of play within a team. But I think, given the nature of camogie and hurling, they're so skillful, and you have to be so technically proficient from when you start until kind of when you finish at 40 or 50 or 60 years of age, that you can't forget the basics. And while I said I'm a huge fan of the games-based approach, it's how you plan your year, allowing for maybe part of every session, or maybe a full session out of every 3 or 4, where you kind of get back to basics, where you're working a lot on your touch and your striking and your shooting, things like that. So as I said, the games-based approach is brilliant, but I don't think we can lose sight of the fact that, sports like hurling and camogie, every now and again, or part of every session, you just work on the fundamentals. And for me, regardless of the level of hurling or camogie, as long as your touch is right and your striking is right, you're a long way to being as proficient as you can be with that sport. So to that end, and I know probably one of the most successful camogie coaches of the last maybe 15 years, JJ Doyle, who I work with in Wexford now, he's a firm believer of that as well, that, games-based approach is brilliant, and we'll talk about that now over the course of the next 15 or 18 minutes. But please don't kind of think that the games-based approach is going to be a kind of a one-size-fits-all for all the sort of shortcomings within the squad. Don't forget about touch, striking, shooting, all that sort of stuff. So I suppose the very first point, or the second point of there, is conditioned games equals positive conditioning. What I mean by that is, you often see, these small-sided games are referred to as conditioned games. And I suppose the traditional method in pre-season and early season about conditioning your teams is it's a lot of heavy running. They see very little of the ball. And I think the very first part of the games-based approach is the positive impact early in the season that games-based approach can have with your kind of coaching, if you like, and with your conditioning, is you can use these small-sided games to get your fitness base and your physical fitness up. What we would find is, the early part of the year, again, I'm lucky enough with the teams I've worked in the last couple of years, we will have specialist S&C coaches. So a lot of the conditioned games that we will come up with for the first 6 or 8 weeks of a year will be built around, I suppose, certain markers that the S&C coaches will have laid out for us. And as I said, what we find is we worry less maybe about the technical, I suppose, executional skills in that block of the year. And it's about getting intensity up, getting kind of, I suppose, a certain physical fitness, a base of physical fitness into the legs. So as I said, at that section of the year, it's maybe less about the actual skills and the technical side of things compared to what they're getting out of it from a physical point of view. And that's hugely important. And like I said, if you could turn up and you're going to do an hour session pre-season with your adult team, and you can say, right, well, we're going to have an hour, we're going to do maybe 3 or 4 different conditioned games. They'll all be with the ball, okay? And all of a sudden you're developing a sort of a very good base of fitness without the players, they're kind of doing it by, you know, on autopilot, if you like. They don't realise they're getting fit and they're working hard. Whereas if you turned up and say, right, we're going to go through 10 100s, followed by a couple of 1K tests, you know, straight away the mindset at the start of the session can be a bit negative. Whereas if you were going up and you've maybe different games set up, it's hugely positive from that point of view. So for me, if you take, I suppose, the games-based approach over the course of a season, I suppose that's one of the big positives I see, in that the early part of your season, you get an awful lot out of, you get an awful lot of the fitness and that heavy endurance work done with your conditioned games. As I said, probably less emphasis on the actual skill execution, but just developing the actual fitness base. The second reason, you know, or the third reason I've down there, third point I want to make, is about developing decision makers. And Stuart, I think, as I said, look, Stuart summed up games-based coaching in his introduction. But from my perspective, the huge thing I've seen over the years where we started to look at this is how it develops decision makers. It's hugely beneficial from that end. And if you look at the kind of origins of game-based coaching in this country, it probably took a huge jump maybe 12, 15 years ago. It became very much the in thing to do. But if you take kind of a step further back, the previous 10, 20, 30 years, if you look at the origins of the idea behind games-based sessions, a lot of it would have come out of this famous IX Academy, and where they're developing young soccer players at a young age. And what they would have seen is they would have used a lot of, you know, 2v2, 3v3, where kids, if you like, are literally finding out the basics of the sport, things like spatial awareness, where they should be moving, where they see, you know, passes going, where they're going to get passes, and that sort of decision making that is done, and it kind of develops a little bit more organically, rather than say kind of these forced drills where you're trying to almost impress upon them the decisions they should take, when in fact they're probably better off developing themselves, as I said, organically. And that's the good thing with the games-based scenarios. You're putting them into scenarios that you want to see them in. And while initially maybe with the group, you're looking at kind of a little bit more guidance and a little bit more coaxing with the particular group. But as you get used to the group, I suppose the better they get, you will see that there's less and less coming from the coach and more coming from the players. I think one of the things that Stuart said at the start, he spoke with the kind of the command style of coaching. And this was, again, there's a certain assumption with what I'm talking about tonight, that every one of your players, you know, are fairly technically proficient. So, you know, you probably, as adults, you have less to worry about from the point of view of honing those skills. And it's more about ensuring they're going to maximize their performance on match days. And to that end, then, the small sided games you're putting them into scenarios that really kind of are very much detailed to how you want to play, and you're kind of encouraging them to make the right decisions under pressure. And that kind of leads me on to replicating the match day scenario situation there. And I suppose, if you like, 3 and 4 could be taken together. So again, if you were playing a certain way, you're going to maybe set up small-sided games and conditioned games to kind of replicate how you're going to perform maybe the following Sunday, or for the course of the year. So by doing that with these game day scenarios, you're putting your players are seeing certain instances that may occur and how they're going to deal with them ahead of time, if you like. And then on game days, when the match arises, when the certain scenario becomes apparent, you know, it's as if they've seen it before, and they should be more familiar and more comfortable in that surrounding. Now, look, there's no point in saying otherwise. You will never 100% replicate an actual match and everything that happens over the course of 60 or 70 minutes in a camogie game. But to the best, I suppose, you're trying to control as a coach as much as you possibly can. And to that end, it's important to remember to try and build your games and your small-sided games and your wide-sided games around the way you want to play. And I suppose, just to build on that point, one of the things I've developed over the last 10 or 11 years as a coach is it's very important to do stuff that's very, I suppose, specific. And again, I'm going to jump ahead to point 8 there. It has to be unique to the way you want to play. There isn't much point in looking at something, you know, in another person's session. It might be a really good drill or a really good game, but that's very unique to how they want to play. So there's no point, for argument's sake, in me trying that game if it's built around maybe playing a sweeper with my own team, when in fact we're not playing a sweep, but we're going to play maybe a lot of long direct ball. And so it's important to do that as well from the point of your match day scenarios, is try and put your players in as many kind of scenarios or situations that you're hoping will arrive or will occur, as I said, on game day. Another big thing from the point of view of these game-based sessions is what I would have used them, or we would have used them with over the last couple of years, is to correct kind of inaccurate execution. And a very practical example I can give how we would have done that in the last couple of years was with Wexford after the first 2 rounds of the Leinster Championship in 2019. We hit an awful lot of wides, and we felt that there wasn't much point in just going through your kind of usual sort of run-of-the-mill shooting drills. We found that, like, playing against teams with swarm defences, we weren't getting our shots off as much as we should have been, or certainly from the positions we wanted to get our shots off in. And we knew with a couple of games coming up, and the games we were playing, the teams we were playing used that sort of swarm defence. So all of a sudden, you had 2 or 3 guys coming at maybe the shooter, and it gave the shooter very short, very split-second time to know whether he was going to shoot or maybe offload the ball. So then we would have built maybe a couple of small-sided games to correct, as I said, the execution of our shooting, which all kind of came about because of the sort of defences we were facing. So in that situation, for argument's sake, we'd have put in maybe boxes in our various shooting zones, and we would have overloaded that with defenders. So the pressure was on the shooter. Might have been 4v2 with maybe 1 pass, and the shooter had to get the shot off after he got the pass. So that's what I mean by kind of correcting an accurate execution. Instead of just going back, saying we hit 15 or 16 wides and just getting them shooting on their own with no pressure, that wasn't realistic to the way we were kind of playing, or the way we saw teams playing against us. So, it's again, all of these points are effectively interconnected. And that, as I said, is one other advantage, or one reason why you would use those game-based scenarios. What didn't work the previous weekend, knowing that you're coming up against a team that plays or defends a certain way the following weekend. Okay, what can we do to set up and play accordingly? And that, as I said, is a very big advantage from the point of view of the game-based drills, because it's going to be as close to match day as possible. So just moving on there, we're okay for time, Stuart, for another 5 or 6 minutes, are we?
Oh, you're flying, yeah, plenty of time. You got 15 minutes yet.
Yeah, that's perfect. So again, just moving along onto the set plays, and I suppose I kind of talk about set plays with a very certain air of trepidation, because look, hurling and camogie is a very, very fluid scenario, and you don't get too many set plays. So there's probably only realistically 3 times in a game, in a camogie game, where that you could be considered kind of a set play. You either have a puck out, a free ball, or a line ball. And again, you're probably going to build little game plans around how you're going to retain possession, how you're going to look to use that possession as best as possible. So setting up your sort of your small-sided games surrounding maybe your puck out strategy, or your frees, your line balls, is hugely important. Example I would give there is last year I would have been involved with my local intermediate camogie club, and we've done an awful lot on breaking ball from the puck outs. So we would have gone over that, I'd say probably once in every training session. We would have worked on a specific breaking ball drill that we would have worked on with the ball coming from the puck out, and also defending the opposition puck out. So again, it's that idea of kind of control the controllables. Okay, you have set plays over the course of 60 or 70 minutes. There's very few set plays, as I said, in a game of hurling or camogie. So things like puck outs, frees, and line balls, they're the only time where you have clear possession. So you have to use that possession as, when I say clear possession with no one putting you under pressure. And it's very, very important then that you use that possession to the utmost of your ability to make sure that you're going to get something out of it. And as I said, that camogie game, we'd have worked in Bruff on maybe different small-sided games in every session, but the one we kept coming back to, because we felt it was hugely important, was, our own puck outs, how we were going to maintain possession, and we would have worked in one particular kind of set play from puck out every night in training. So what I'll do is I'll actually go through to point 8 now, and I'll come back to number 7, because I probably should have put them the other way around. and I touched on this earlier in the talk, it's very important, I suppose, as I said, from my point of view, one of the big failings I had as a coach in the early days was I was looking at drills that different coaches had. I was looking at different sports, and if they looked shiny and nice and good and fancy, I was using them for whatever team I was involved in. But realistically, there was no relationship to what I was doing in the sessions and how we wanted to play. Yeah, the drills were really good, or the small set of games were good, but they weren't suited to the teams I was involved in. So it's very, very important, if you are using these small-sided games, to make sure that they're very specific to how you want to play and how you're going to play and what you want to get out of the year with your team. So it is hugely important to make sure whatever you're doing, is built around your strengths and your weaknesses. And I suppose at times, with all this access we have now to things like video analysis and stuff like that, I find a lot of teams are focusing almost too much on the opposition. Fair enough, you'll always have to look at maybe 1 or 2 points the opposition will have, but ultimately I'm a firm believer in looking at your strengths, and it's just building your game plans and your training sessions around your strength, and with an aim to maximising how you get the most out of your own squad and out of your own team. And I think even when you're planning your sessions, I mean, again, I'll keep getting back to Stuart's 3 or 4 slides that he spoke about at the start. And as I said, Stuart basically summed up small set of games and game-based approach to coaching in those slides. And he said that he spoke about preparation. Preparation is key. It's very, very important that there's a structure to your training session, that whatever I do on a Tuesday night is linked to maybe what I'm going to on a Thursday or Friday night, the next session, which is linked to kind of Sunday's game. And again, that's something I would have learned over the years. Try not to kind of have your training sessions in isolation. Make sure they're linked. What you're doing, tonight will have a knock-on effect to the next night, and to the game you have at the weekend or whatever. So it's very, very important from that point of view, I think, to make sure that, there's a very strong link with all your sessions and with the games you're playing within those sessions. The last point I put in there, walkthroughs. And while these aren't maybe small-sided games as such, there's something I would have done with a number of teams over the last couple of years, and this was more and more teams are doing them. And again, it's linked back maybe to the style of play or the game plan you have, and that's whereby you line up your team, and literally maybe you might do it the night or the second last night before the game, and you'll just give them scenarios. You might work on the puck out. So what I find with these walkthroughs, it's much slower, say maybe in the actual game-based approach. You'll train a ball, you'll ask a guy to play a cross-field ball and how the other 2 people are going to deal with that. You're going to work a lot maybe on puck outs in that scenario. What I do find about walkthroughs is the players aren't hugely fond of them because they can be a little bit static for maybe 15, 20 minutes. But sometimes I found over the last years, and the players will admit afterwards, they will get far more maybe out of those walkthroughs. And if you've questions about those in time, it might be easier for me to answer questions about it and actually talk you through it at the moment, because again, it's kind of specific to what I would have done with teams. But the teams do find they get an awful lot out of it because there's no pace in it. You've all the kind of the really fast, frenetic, high intensity stuff done. So this is something where you can literally walk through your scenarios, if you like. And that's where I suppose as a coach at adult level, if you were with a squad that's well established, if it's your second or third or fourth year there, that's where you're giving these players, little kind of problems that they're going to come up with the answers. And again, to something Stuart mentioned earlier about the kind of the command-based notion of training at adult level, I always said the term coach should be replaced with facilitator, particularly at adult level, because all you're doing is you're trying to facilitate the very best and to maximize your players' potential and getting them to perform to their maximum. So to that end, in these games-based approach, with all these small set of games, with these walkthroughs, if you get the players almost giving you the answers to potential problems, you've hit the jackpot. And to really get the most out of your squad, if you as a coach at adult level, maybe 2 or 3 years with the same team, if you're still dictating or trying to impress upon them what they should be doing, you're not going to get the most out of them. And again, I found that the hard way at times over the years with different teams, where you just had to take a step back and give them a little bit more, I suppose, ownership, and give them the scenarios and how they might deal with those scenarios. And again, last point before we take the questions and answers in this particular group is again the basics. And again, I'm not contradicting what I've said regarding game-based sessions, but for me, a sport like camogie, a sport like hurling, you have to be so technically proficient. You know, you're not going to hone those skills if you just focus on fully game-based data in every session. So like I said, maybe one session out of 4 or 5 do fully touch, striking, tackling, things like that, or maybe part of every session work on maybe striking this session. The next session you might just do a touch drill. But I think it's the best thing is how you marry both games based and skills. So Stuart, I think that's me done on that.
Super. Thank you very much, Serge. That was excellent. So yeah, a few questions just on a couple of things you put in. So the first one, just while on your last approach there, in terms of the kind of balance of drills and games, do you have a certain way that you structure a session, or that you like a session to be structured in terms of drills, games, the balance of it?
Like I said, sometimes you might, for argument's sake, you might do one session out of maybe 5 or 6 where you move away. You will have no game based things in that session, you have no games if you like in that session, and you'll just go purely with a skills based session. Sometimes I do that this time of the year where you're getting back in pre-season, so maybe if and there are sessions where the S&C coach will want to do, you know, out and out, I suppose, endurance work or speed work, which can't be done in the conditioned game. So what you'll do then is almost like a bit of recovery for the players. You might do a couple of skills based drills, but generally speaking, it varies, you know. Sometimes you're kind of, I suppose, led and said by what happens the previous Sunday of the game, what worked, what didn't work, and you'll build your sessions around that. But I definitely like to put in the equivalent of one full session out of every 4 skills based. Now, if that is maybe a quarter of 4 sessions being skill based, or one full session out of 4, that's generally kind of, if you like, a 1-to-4 ratio, for want of a better word, Stuart.
Yeah, super. Thank you. One was about kind of examples of conditioned games. You mentioned conditioned games there at the start of it. Do you have any examples of ones that you use particularly, or kind of ways that you do it?
I suppose the thing is, there's so many different. It's very specific to what you want to play. Has the person who asked that question anything in mind as to a particular? Is it for shooting? Is it for defending? Is it for?
So that was from Dennis. So Dennis, you can put in if you've got a particular one there, but I'll kind of go on to that a little bit. So in terms of kind of, it might answer the question itself. How do you go about adjusting the pitch size and player numbers to work on different qualities? Do you have certain ways that you do it?
Yeah, a lot of it is to say, for argument's sake, depending on how much you want to get out. I think the time of the year has a lot to do with it. So if you want to get a good bit of conditioning into them, you might have bigger pitches with smaller numbers, if you know what I mean, this time of the year. So it forces them to work that little bit harder, and they're going to be more tired. As the year goes on, then you might have, again, if you're coming up against a lot of the way modern day hurling and camogie, the middle third is very, very clustered and crowded at times. So then what you'll do is we'll just bring in the pitch a good bit, and you'll have maybe 30 by 30, and you might have a lot of bodies in that square, and you'll be working on certain things within that then to try and get the most out of it.
Yeah, no, that's super. Yeah, no, that's answered it bang on. Thank you. Thanks, Dennis. Thanks for clarifying that. And again, that fits in well to, I think, it was one of the GA coaching webinars where it was one of the physios was talking about returning to play, and that's exactly how he would have described it. He said doing bigger pitches and smaller numbers first, and then going into bigger numbers and smaller pitches once you've got a bit of conditioning behind you.
Just to add to that is, again, the time of the year, what you'll find is the games might go on for a little bit longer this time of the year, because again, you're trying to get the conditioning into the players without any sort of monotonous running. So the games go on for a little bit longer. As you get into the year a bit further, you're looking for real quality. So the intensity is up and the volume is down. Now, as I said, look, I'm no expert in S&C, and I'm very lucky that the level I've been working at for the last couple of years, I've S&C people with me, and I would be led to say by what they say, and also things like the live GPS, what you're trying to get out of a session. You'll build your sessions around that, Stuart. So as I said, the other thing for me is at times, and I'm still to this day guilty of it, is letting the small side of games go on too long. Is at the start of the year, you might want to just get the condition out of it, and you can let it go on for a minute and a half or 2 minutes, but you just have to judge it yourself. If guys are getting tired, or if girls are getting tired, and you were hoping maybe to get a lot of technical proficiency out of that game, and it's just fallen down, you need to call it up very quickly and realize, right, the next time we after a break, we're going to go, maybe we're going to take 30 seconds off that and work more on the quality of what they're doing as opposed to the quantity, you know.
No, that's superb. And kind of moving on then to the to almost your sort of your questioning as a coach. So there's something like, how did your players find the kind of the more instructional conversation approach to coaching? Did they buy in? Was there any resistance to it? Did they not understand it? Did you have any issues?
As in from instructional from my point of view, or a little bit more from their point of view?
As in, more like in the small sided games when you were asking them questions and trying to guide them along.
No, look, as I said, that's something that is done once you kind of have the trust of the group. I wouldn't be doing that with a new group straight away, Stuart, because, you know, it's a little bit more, I think it's very important to kind of, I suppose, to use the command style or the autocratic style where you're new to a squad, because again, if you can kind of take too much feedback in the middle of a session, and the last you want is everyone chiming in with ideas and certain scenarios as to how things can work. But it's just over time you get to know your players, and I think the modern, I suppose, the current generation are definitely different from maybe even the generation that would have maybe finished in the last 5 or 6 years. And I find that dictatorial approach doesn't work as much. So they're quite open to giving their opinion and, you know, being involved in that, and they like that. And ultimately, Stuart, as I said, you know, if I have to stand up to a group and literally tell them night in, night out what they should and shouldn't be doing, well, I would say I haven't done my job correctly, because, you know, that's fine in the beginning, but we're literally there as facilitators. And I suppose the one issue I have at the moment isn't so much I see with under coaching, but I think over coaching is far more prevalent in I suppose the negatives I've seen the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, that's a very good point you made there in terms of the kind of conversational approach to questioning is probably something that you would build up to, as in try to do that with a brand new group would be quite difficult.
Sorry for cutting across you. What we would find as well, again, generally in Wexford, what we'll do is we'll have a meeting before training. So a lot of that, just in that environment, it's done, I suppose, in the meeting room. So the scenarios, we'll discuss what we're going to do in training, and then it's sort of played out kind of in the meeting room, if you like, and then they will also give their opinion during the session. But a lot of that is started done prior to the actual game starting, the small sided game starting. So with that in mind, then the games can just run themselves. Now, albeit you will blow them up and you say, listen, what worked there, what didn't work.
No, that's excellent. And then just in the last part on that, someone's asked about the type of questions. So, as in, do you have certain types of questions that you ask to get answers out of them, or is there a certain way you go about it?
No, there isn't any specific way I go about asking questions of the group. I suppose what I would look at is what we want to get out of, what we want to get out for a particular drill. So if it's to maybe retain a possession where you might be overloaded on one side of the pitch or in one square, you're kind of probing them as to how they could retain possession, how they could create space. But I don't have any one approach. You kind of just do it by feel on with Stuart. You know, you see how it's going, and you'll have, again, a lot of this comes down to the kind of, I suppose, how well you know your players and how to kind of approach it to that end. I don't think there's any hard and fast technique for questioning the players or maybe getting your point across. It's very personal to each individual coach, you know.
Super. And in the last 20 seconds, what's the biggest mistake that you made when trying to do a games-based approach?
The biggest advice for people. That was the important thing I meant to say as well. Is don't ever be afraid to fail. I'll fail every night to train. You'll try things, they won't work. They might work the next night. The biggest mistake I made from a point of view of a small-sided game was it was just something that was far too technical for a minor team I was with last year, and the whole thing fell flat in its face. And I'd come from just doing a session with the minor lads at home, and I'd come from maybe 3 or 4 months down in Wexford, and I was trying to get back doing stuff that, you know, was second nature to those lads. And even though they were a good minor team, I didn't explain it properly, and the failure